Hi guys, today I'm here to talk to you about how to write a research practices outcome. So the format that I'm going to suggest that you write or produce is a report. The reason for this is because you can link to your key findings. You can use your key findings as your subheadings. It's also really clear where you should insert examples through a sexy paragraph, and you're able to insert things like footnotes, which allows you to cite the information that you found really easily. The research project, it's suggested that you don't necessarily have to do a report. A report can be easier to write. However, depending on the question that you end up asking determines the type of outcome that you produce at the end. So make sure that when you are deciding on what outcome you're going to make, what format that's going to take, you have a conversation with your teacher about it, because otherwise what might happen is you might stick to something that seems like a really good idea but actually ends up taking you way too long to do it, or otherwise something that just really doesn't suit either the audience or the question that you're asking. Right, so for the research practices outcome, what I'm suggesting is a report, and your report has very particular parts to it. First of all, what I'm going to tell you is it's about 500 to 600 words long for research practices. In research project, you have up to 2,000 words or up to 12 minutes to produce this with. So the research practices one is a very mute version of research project. So the information that you need to know, first of all, 500 to 600 words, and you have to in there incorporate some of the evidence that you've collected through your surveys. The first thing you need to do for research practices for your outcome is put a title. The title should actually be your research practices question. Alright, so in the case of the example that's in front of you at the moment, my question is, why did the Romanov family lose power in Russia during 1917? Alright, it's not how did it, it's not when did they, it is why did they. So that actually invites an argument. There has to be at least two opinions as to why they lost power in 1917. The second thing you need to incorporate is an introduction. The introduction provides context for what you're writing. So if the person who's reading it has absolutely no idea what you're talking about, the introduction should at the very first provide them with a time, a place, and the people who are involved in it, or the group who are involved. So that's your very first sentence. Make sure your very first sentence has who, when, and where in it. The second sentence that you should write should explain what you're talking about, and that's in this case, the why and the how. So you put in that section what your key findings are. Don't say my key findings are blah blah and blee. You say something like this is because, or this happens because, or this is a reaction to. Alright, so make sure that your key findings are listed in the second sentence of your paragraph, or your introduction. The last bit of your introduction should actually be your question as a statement. So in this case, why did the Romanov family lose power in Russia during 1917? Needs to be, it was these conditions that eventually saw the forced abdication of Nicholas II in February 1917, the end of the Romanov line, and the eventual rise of the Bolsheviks to power in the Russian state. That could be changed quite easily into these are the reasons why the Romanov family lost power in Russia during 1917. So turning your question into a statement means you take away the questioning word, the why, the how, and you take away the question mark at the end, and you make it a sentence. All right. This third bit of a report is actually a key finding. So what you need to include first and foremost is a subheading. The subheading should actually indicate what's going to be discussed underneath. That might be one of your key finding questions, or it might just be a word that indicates what's going to come afterwards. So a paragraph in a report for year 11 for year 12 should actually include two examples, lots of evidence, and a description of that evidence, or a link back to the question of that evidence. It should show that you understand what the evidence actually suggests. So if you look at the example that you've been given, first of all, the subheading is education. So underneath you know that they being me, is going to discuss education as one of the reasons why the Romanov line fell in Russia in 1917. First of all, an S, you need to explain the context for what you're going to discuss. So what is the key finding? And what my S in this example says is that only a small amount of people were able to access education in Russia during this time. Then an E explains that key finding. So it could be what is education, it could be why that education wasn't accessible. It could be who accesses that education. And X should be the examples that you found that supports the evidence that you've got. So in this case, I have put that there was a guy called Nicholas II and he allowed education to be more accessible by more people. Because that is evidence that I found, that has to be cited. So if you look at the first X right at the very end on the right hand side of the punctuation, there's a 1. That's a footnote. That footnote actually links to a citation that's at the bottom of the page. So in order to do that, you go insert, footnote, insert, and it will put it at the bottom of the page for you. The next part of the paragraph is another elaboration. So you're providing more evidence and you need to provide more context for that evidence that you're going to give. And then after that follows another example. And then at the end, you link back to the question. So why does this show the answer to your question? That could be the answer to your sub question, so your key finding, or that could be your big answer to your big question. It would be better if the why in these paragraphs links back to your big question. Alright, I'm also asking you to write a second paragraph. I want you to repeat the kind of thing that you've done in there. I need a subheading, I need a subject, an elaboration, an example with a footnote, then another elaboration, another example, and then a link back to your question. The conclusion is one of those things that's kind of like the introduction. It provides the same sort of evidence, the same sort of ideas, however it's just reworded. So again, the first sentence should have who, when and where. The next sentence should have what and how. And the last sentence should be your question as a statement. So you are always going back and making sure that the start of your report and the end of your report match each other. Remember, introductions and conclusions are like the bun of a hamburger. They're made out of the same stuff, they just look slightly different. And in between, that's the meaty part of the hamburger. You've got the X and the elaboration and the examples. That might be the meat and the bacon. Then you've got another elaboration and another example, which might be a double meat patty and double bacon. And then in the next paragraph, that's where the cheese is, and that's where the lettuce is. All right. So think of it as a hamburger. Have you got a bun at the top, a bun at the bottom? Do they kind of look the same, or do they not have anything in common? If they don't have anything in common, they're not really supporting the rest of the bits that are in the middle. All right. At the bottom of your page, if you're including footnotes, they'll automatically go to the bottom of your page. There'll be a line across it, and then the footnotes linked underneath it. Those footnotes should include citation information. Citation information is what you include in your bibliography. So if you write your bibliography before you start writing your outcome, you can just copy and paste that citation information into your footnotes and you're fine. If what you're doing is trying to write your citations or your footnotes as you go, make sure you copy those into a bibliography so you don't have to write it again later. All right. So your footnotes automatically insert themselves into the bottom of the page. Bibliography also needs to be included. Just remember, just for a second, that a bibliography is everything that you've read, even if you don't refer to it at all in your outcome. That's completely fine. But you should list at least 5 different sources that you have in some way researched, and in your research practices we're asking you for at least one link back to your surveys. So talk about how your surveys have provided you some evidence with the answer to your question at the end. With research practices, if you don't answer your whole question, that's okay. I'm not going to be that concerned about it. That's something you can talk about in your evaluation in the next part. But I want you to make sure that you can link that some of the evidence that you've found to a key finding which does answer your question. All right, so this document is available through DAMAP. It's also been emailed out to you, so you can always have a copy of it. If you're going to use this as a guide for research project, just remember this is a small version of research project, so you're going to have to write a whole heap more or produce a whole heap more for research project than you're doing in this one. If you have any questions, please ask. So cool, good, easy, done. Thank you very much. See you later.